The auditorium buzzed with excitement long before the event even started. Students from different cities had traveled just to catch a glimpse of the world-famous pianist who was visiting the academy that day. Many believed it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and they crowded the room with bright eyes and hopeful hearts. Some hoped to learn his techniques, others hoped to impress him, and a few simply wanted to see greatness up close. In the middle of all that excitement, a blind girl entered quietly, guided by her older brother. She walked slowly, tapping her cane softly on the shiny floor, relying on the gentle sound to understand where she was going. Her brother kept one hand hovering near her shoulder, careful not to push or rush her. He knew she didn't like to be treated as weak, but he stayed close enough to help her avoid the edges of chairs and music stands. She carried herself in a shy but calm way. Although she couldn't see the room around her, she felt the energy in the air. She heard shoes scraping, whispers floating, and the nervous laughter of students waiting for their turn to be judged. She could tell the place was wide and open, with sound bouncing clearly off the tall walls. She smelled the faint scent of polished wood and could tell the grand piano must have been recently cleaned. Music was all she ever wanted to be part of, even though people often doubted her. She never complained. Instead, she worked quietly, practicing on a small old keyboard at home, learning melodies by listening again and again. She had no expensive teachers and no chance to attend music school, but she held a dream close to her heart. Even when others didn't believe in her. When the famous pianist finally walked in, the room fell silent. He carried himself with confidence, moving like he was used to being praised. Students admired him. They whispered his achievements to each other. Everyone saw him as someone far above them, someone whose approval could change their future. The blind girl listened carefully. She heard his steps, firm and sharp. She heard the way people held their breath when he passed by. She even heard the proud tone in his voice when he greeted the audience. She didn't dislike him for it. She simply knew this was a man the world respected. After his introduction, he began the masterclass, demonstrating techniques and correcting students who came up to play. Some did well, and he nodded at them. Others made mistakes, and he pointed them out without hesitation. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't gentle either. He believed in perfection, and perfection only. The blind girl listened closely to each performance. She sat in the second row, her hands resting on her lap as if she could feel the music even from there. Her brother whispered descriptions to her from time to time, but she didn't need them. She understood everything through sound. When the session reached a short break, she gathered her courage and gently raised her hand. Her brother looked at her with surprise, but he didn't stop her. She asked in a soft, polite voice if she could try playing the grand piano just one short melody. The room reacted before the pianist even spoke. A few students exchanged confused looks. Some whispered things like, "Why would she try? And she can't even see the keys." One or two chuckled softly, not loud enough to be noticed by the instructors, but loud enough for the girl to hear. The famous pianist turned toward her voice. His expression changed, though she couldn't see it. His steps approached her as he spoke. "You want to try the piano?" he asked, sounding surprised. "You can't see the instrument. It's not a toy. It requires precision, understanding of distance, posture, touch. You might hurt yourself or damage it." The girl didn't say anything for a moment. She simply held her cane a little tighter. Her brother stepped a bit closer, ready to defend her if needed. "I won't hurt it," she said softly. "I only want to play a small tune." Her calm voice made some students go quiet. Others, however, smirked or nudged each other, waiting for the pianist's reaction. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "My dear, music isn't something you can just attempt without proper training, especially not on this level. People practice for years to understand this instrument. You won't be able to manage even a few notes correctly. It would be unfair to the others who worked hard for this opportunity." His words didn't sound angry, but they carried the weight of someone who believed he was speaking the truth. And for many people in the room, his opinion was the final answer. A few students looked away, uncomfortable. Some even nodded in agreement. The blind girl lowered her face slightly, though she didn't cry. She had heard similar words before, but hearing them in such a crowded place made her chest tighten. Her brother couldn't stay silent anymore. He stepped forward and spoke with steady courage. "She isn't asking for a full performance, just one moment at the keys. She has practiced for years at home. She deserves a chance like everyone else." The pianist shook his head. "This is not the place for experiments. I cannot allow it." His voice had finality in it, and the room seemed to accept his judgment. The blind girl sat quietly again, her hands still folded, trying not to let disappointment show on her face. But the moment stayed with her brother. He kept watching the piano, and the pianist, then his sister. He knew how much she loved music. He knew how hard she tried to learn without complaining. Seeing her be dismissed so quickly felt unfair. The break ended, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. Some students whispered among themselves, still amused or confused. Others felt a little guilty but didn't speak up. The blind girl sat silently, listening to the next student play, but she felt like the joy of music had been dimmed. The famous pianist continued teaching, but even he sensed a small disturbance in the room. For a brief second, he glanced at the blind girl again. He didn't hate her or wish her harm. He simply believed she was stepping into a world too big for her. The girl kept her head up, refusing to let the rejection break her spirit. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She only felt a quiet sadness that she tried to hide. All she had wanted was one moment at the piano, one simple chance to let her heart speak. But fate had its own plan, and the moment of silence she sat in that day was only the beginning of something far greater than anyone in the room expected. The short break came to an end, but the atmosphere in the auditorium felt different. The blind girl sat quietly in her seat, her hands folded gently over her cane. She didn't want to show disappointment, and she kept her face calm. But inside her chest, there was a small heaviness she couldn't ignore. The sound of students talking, moving chairs, and tuning their instruments felt less warm than before. Even the air around her felt heavier. Her brother sat beside her, trying to hide his frustration. He wasn't angry at anyone in particular, but he felt the sting of seeing his sister turned away so quickly. He knew how much courage it took for her to ask that simple question. He knew the long nights she spent practicing with her old keyboard that had several keys not working properly. He also knew how she smiled every time she made progress, even if no one saw or heard her achievements dot as the masterclass continued. The famous pianist called another student to the stage. The boy played a piece with trembling fingers, trying his best to impress the teacher. The pianist corrected him, demonstrating the right technique with strict precision. The audience watched closely, taking mental notes, absorbing every bit of advice, but the blind girl's mind drifted away from the lesson. She listened to every note, every correction, every sigh of frustration from the nervous students, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. She had come to this academy hoping for a small chance. Even if it was tiny, just one touch of the grand piano she had dreamed of for years. Her brother finally leaned toward her and whispered softly, "Don't let his words stop you. You're better than people think." She turned her face slightly toward his voice and smiled faintly. "I'm not upset with him," she whispered back. "I just wanted to feel the keys. That's all." Her brother nodded, even though she couldn't see it. He admired her gentle strength. She didn't complain, she didn't argue, and she didn't let bitterness change her tone. She simply accepted things with quiet grace. But inside him, Something refused to settle Dot as another student finished playing. A kind instructor from the academy stepped onto the stage. She had watched the whole scene earlier and had felt a sense of discomfort. She believed everyone deserved at least one chance, especially someone who asked with such respect. During a pause in the session, she approached the blind girl and her brother. She spoke softly, careful not to draw too much attention. "You have a lot of courage," she said gently. "Not many people would raise their hand in a room like this." The blind girl bowed her head a little, not knowing how to respond. The instructor continued, "Don't lose hope. Opportunity has a strange way of coming when you least expect it." Her brother thanked the instructor with a grateful voice. Her kindness was like a small light in the middle of what had felt like a dark moment. The master class went on, but the room no longer felt as enthusiastic as before. Many students had heard the exchange about the blind girl, and though some still whispered and chuckled behind their hands, others had begun to feel uneasy. They wondered what it must feel like to ask for something so simple and be denied in front of a full room. The famous pianist, however, remained focused on his lesson. He played, corrected, explained, and demonstrated without acknowledging, the quiet tension lingering in the air. When the master class reached the second break, students spread out in small groups, talking in lowered voices as they practiced finger exercises or stretched their hands. The grand piano sat at the center of the stage, shining under the soft lights, untouched by anyone except the teacher. The blind girl sat quietly in her seat, feeling the space around her shift as people moved. She traced the edge of her cane with her fingers, wondering if maybe she had asked for too much. Maybe the pianist was right. Maybe she didn't belong in a place like this. Her brother sensed her thoughts. He carefully took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Hey," he said softly, "you belong anywhere talent is." She smiled again, just a small one. He always knew how to lift her spirit, even when she didn't say a word. During the break, most of the audience left the hall to get snacks or walk around. The room grew quiet, with only a few people remaining. The blind girl's brother looked around and noticed the stage wasn't as crowded anymore. He turned to her and asked softly, "Do you still want to try the piano? Even if nobody listens, even if nobody claps?" She hesitated, unsure if she should. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to seem disrespectful to the academy or the famous pianist. But her heart yearned for that moment, the chance to touch the keys she had only imagined. I do," she finally whispered. That was all he needed to hear. He stood up, guided her gently, and helped her walk toward the stage. Step by step, she approached the grand piano, her cane tapping lightly along the floor. The instrument felt huge even before she reached it. She could sense its presence from the way the sound changed and open space ahead. A slight echo in the air. Her brother carefully placed her hand on the edge of the piano. She traced the smooth wood with slow, respectful fingers, almost as if she were greeting an old friend she had never met before. She felt the gentle curve of the frame, the perfect polish, the cool surface. She took a quiet breath, her heart beating a little faster. This was all she wanted, a chance to feel something real. But just as she lifted her other hand toward the keys, a familiar sharp voice broke the silence. "What do you think you're doing?" The famous pianist had returned earlier than expected. His footsteps grew louder as he approached them. The blind girl froze, her fingers hovering just above the keys. Her brother stepped in front of her slightly, his voice calm but firm. "She's only touching the piano." The pianist shook his head as he came closer. "This is not allowed. This is a master class, not a playground. You cannot let her treat this instrument like something she can experiment with." His tone wasn't yelling, but it carried enough force to make a few students near the doorway turn their heads. The brother kept his composure. "She's not experimenting. She knows how to play." She only wanted one moment. The pianist let out a slow sigh, full of disbelief. You don't understand. A grand piano is not easy for a trained musician, let alone someone who cannot see the keys. It's impossible for her to play anything correctly. Why create disappointment? The blind girl's hands trembled slightly. She didn't want conflict. She didn't want people gathering. She only wanted peace and a simple chance. I'm not trying to disrespect your rules, she said softly. I just wanted to play a small tune. Only for myself. Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. But the pianist still shook his head. No, he said firmly. I can't allow this. A small group of students had gathered near the back, watching quietly. Some looked annoyed by the pianist's harshness. Some felt uncomfortable. A few whispered, but no one spoke up. The blind girl's brother felt frustration rise inside him, but he forced himself to speak calmly. She isn't asking for applause. She isn't asking for attention. Just one moment to play something she's been practicing for years. Practice? The pianist repeated, sounding doubtful. On what? A basic keyboard at home? That is not the same as a real piano. The brother didn't back down. But it's all she had. And she never stopped learning. The pianist looked at the girl again. Really looked this time, though. She couldn't see his expression. She stood there, with her hand resting lightly on the piano's surface. Her posture wasn't demanding. She didn't challenge him. She simply waited, hoping he might understand. For a moment, there was silence. Then the pianist spoke again, quieter but still firm. No, I cannot let this happen. Those words settled into the room like a cold wind. The blind girl lowered her head. Her brother gently guided her hands away from the piano. She didn't cry, but the silence around her felt heavier than before. What none of them knew was that this moment, this small conflict, this small refusal was just the beginning. The world's opinion, the pianist's belief, the student's doubts, all of it would soon be tested, because the girl, though quiet and gentle, carried something extraordinary inside her dot, and soon, everyone in that room would witness it. The auditorium stayed unusually quiet after the famous pianist's refusal, even though people had spread out again, walking in and out of the room, practicing in the hallway, and whispering among themselves. There was a faint tension hanging in the air. It was as if the whole place had witnessed something it didn't quite know how to react to. The blind girl sat once more in her seat beside her brother. She held her cane loosely, her fingers tracing its smooth surface again and again, a habit she had whenever she tried not to feel sad. She didn't want anyone to think she was hurt, and she definitely didn't want attention. In truth, she was only trying to calm her heart. Her brother watched her closely. He could see the frustration she was trying so hard to hide. It wasn't anger. She didn't carry anger in her. It was disappointment. Disappointment that she had carried for many years, but never allowed to break her spirit. You still want to play, he said quietly. She turned slightly toward him, her expression soft but honest. I just want to hear the sound of a real piano under my fingers, even if it's just once. He nodded slowly. He understood better than anyone. To her, music wasn't a skill or a hobby. It was a world she lived in, a world she could see even without sight. And the grand piano at the front of the room wasn't simply an instrument. It was the doorway to that world dot. As the room emptied even more, the kind instructor from earlier approached them again. She had watched everything, including how the pianist denied the girl a second time. She felt sympathy, but more than that, she felt admiration for the girl's gentle persistence. The next session will start in a few minutes, the instructor said softly. If you want to stretch your legs or step outside, you have time. The girl smiled politely and nodded. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't want pity, but she appreciated the instructor's kindness. As they stood up, her brother guided her slowly up the aisle. They walked toward the hallway, where the sounds were softer, and the air felt cooler. Students were practicing quietly in corners, humming notes under their breath, or listening to recordings on their phones. The blind girl paused and tilted her head. She could hear the faint sound of the pianist's voice from inside the auditorium as he spoke to one of the assistants. He sounded confident, firm, and sure of everything he said, as always. Her brother gently touched her hand. "Let's sit here for a bit." They took a seat on a long bench near the wall. The girl sat still, listening to the mixture of sounds around her. She heard someone practicing scales. She heard another tapping their fingers nervously on a music stand. She heard footsteps echoing across the open hallway. She also heard something else, something small and soft. It was a piano. Not the grand one from the auditorium, but a small upright piano placed in a practice room nearby. The sound was gentler, not as rich, not as deep, but it was still music. It called to her like a whisper she couldn't ignore. "There's a piano," she said quietly. Her brother listened and nodded. "Probably in the practice room." He looked around. No one seemed to be paying attention to them. The famous pianist was still inside the auditorium. The students in the hallway were too focused on their own practice. The small room where the soft piano sound came from had its door slightly open. It was almost as if it were inviting her. Her brother turned to her and spoke softly, "Do you want to try?" She hesitated. Her heart beat a little faster. She didn't want to break rules. She didn't want to seem like she was sneaking around. But the desire inside her was too strong. "Just for a moment," she whispered. So her brother guided her slowly toward the practice room. The closer they got, the clearer the sound became. The student inside was playing slowly, practicing each note with hesitation. He seemed unsure, perhaps a beginner. When they reached the door, the student inside stopped immediately and turned his head. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was here," he said with a shy voice. The girl's brother lifted a hand politely. "Sorry, we didn't mean to disturb you." No, the student replied. "I was just practicing. Do you need the room?" The blind girl stayed quiet, but her brother spoke softly. She wanted to feel the piano for a moment. Just a moment. The student's eyes widened a little. He recognized her, the girl the famous pianist had refused. His expression softened immediately. "Of course," he said. "Please, go ahead." He stood and stepped aside, giving her space. Her brother guided her gently to the small bench. She sat down slowly as the student watched with curiosity and growing respect. She lifted her hands and let her. Fingertips touched the keys. They were warmer than she expected, as if many hands had pressed them before her. The texture was familiar, even if the shape felt slightly different from her old keyboard. She traced the edges of the keys softly, letting the feeling sink into her skin. Her first touch was gentle, a single note. It rang softly, filling the small room. The student's eyes widened. Her brother watched her with quiet pride. She pressed another key. Then another. Slowly, a pattern formed. A rhythm. A melody. She began playing the piece she had practiced for years, the one she had memorized not from sight, but from the sound of a recording she had listened to countless times. Late into the night. Her fingers moved with surprising confidence for someone who had never touched a real piano of this kind before. They moved like they belonged there, as if the instrument was an extension of her own heart. The student in the room stepped back, amazed. He had played the same keys minutes ago, but they had never sounded like this. The melody she created was soft yet full of emotion, hopeful, gentle, and alive. Her brother watched her closely. He saw the small smile growing on her face, a smile she hadn't shown since the moment She entered the auditorium, but what none of them knew was that someone else was listening. Through the slightly open door, a shadow stood quietly, the famous pianist. He had stepped into the hallway to take a call, but the moment he heard music coming from the practice room, he paused. Something in the melody, something pure and honest, made him stop walking. He moved closer without thinking. He watched through the small opening in the door as the blind girl's fingers danced across the keys. He recognized the piece she played, but he had never heard it like this. There was no technique in her hands, no strict training, no formal structure, but there was emotion raw, deep emotion, something many skilled players struggled to show. The girl, unaware of everyone watching, continued playing. She lost herself in the melody. Each note seemed to pull another from her soul. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She played as if the piano itself was guiding her. When the final note faded, the room fell silent. She kept her fingers resting on the keys, breathing softly. Her heart felt light for the first time that day. The student inside the room whispered, almost breathless, "That was amazing." Her brother squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're incredible." She smiled shyly, not knowing what her hands had truly created. Then a slow clap echoed from the doorway. The girl froze. Her brother turned sharply. The student's eyes widened. The famous pianist stood there, his expression no longer hard or confident, but shocked. He stepped inside, looking at the girl's hands, then at her face. "That was you?" he asked quietly. The girl lowered her head. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break any rules." But he shook his head slowly. "No," he said softly. "Don't apologize." For the first time that day, his voice carried no pride, only awe, and a dawning realization that the girl he dismissed might be far more gifted than any student he had taught. The hall felt different that morning, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The girl moved with careful steps, her hand brushing the wall as she walked, but her face carried a calm strength. She had spent the night practicing, not on a real piano, but in her mind. Every note, every pause, every soft breath between phrases replayed in her thoughts like a quiet echo of hope. She knew she had only one chance left. One chance to show the world that she was more than what people believed. The morning light warmed her hands as she reached the rehearsal room. She could hear someone already inside. The sound of fingers rushing over the keys, sharp and impatient, filled the air. She recognized the style, fast, polished, confident, but without any warmth. It was the famous pianist, the same one who had insulted her on stage, the man who believed skill lived only in sight. He played as if the piano owed him respect. He played as if sound existed to obey him. She paused at the door, listening. Every strike of his fingers echoed power, but she also heard something else beneath the tension. For the first time, she sensed that the man who once mocked her now felt unsure. The memory of her last performance lingered in his mind. She could hear it in the way he played, pushing too hard, forcing each note. He was chasing something he had lost the moment she touched the piano. She stepped inside quietly, and the pianist stopped mid-phrase. He didn't greet her. He didn't speak. But she heard the shift in his breathing. He was not alone anymore, and he knew it. She walked to the bench slowly, her cane tapping lightly. She placed it aside and traced her fingers over the keys as if greeting old friends. "I hope you slept well," he said at last, his voice sharp but not quite steady. "I tried," she replied softly. "Today matters." He let out a slow breath. "Do you really think you're ready for an audience again, after what happened yesterday?" She smiled a little. "I think I'm ready for the truth." He didn't say anything. Maybe he didn't have the words. Maybe he didn't know how to speak to someone who refused to be broken. she started to play. Not loud, not fast, just a simple melody, gentle and steady like quiet morning light. She put emotion into each note, letting her heart guide her hands. The pianist stood behind her, and though he said nothing, she felt his attention sharpen. Her song wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every breath, every tremble, every rise in the melody flowed from something deeper than technique. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to speak. And the piano became her voice. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. The pianist walked past her, saying nothing, and exited. For a moment, she wondered if she had disappointed him again. But then she remembered something important. His opinion wasn't her measure anymore. Later that day, as she sat in the corner of the hall waiting for her next rehearsal, she overheard two staff members talking. One whispered, "He didn't sleep last night." He kept replaying her performance in his head. Another said, "I think she's changing him. He'll never admit it, but he's shaken." Hearing that didn't make her proud. It made her hopeful. She didn't want to defeat him. She wanted to prove that talent didn't belong to only one kind of person. As noon approached, more musicians arrived. Some glanced her way with curiosity, others with doubt, a few with something that felt like pity. But one young violinist sat beside her and said, "Your playing yesterday, it made me cry." It felt honest. The girl's throat tightened a little. Compliments didn't usually comfort her, but honesty did. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm trying my best." "You don't need to try," the violinist said softly. "You already have something we trained for years to find. You feel the music." Before she could respond, the famous pianist re-entered the hall. The chatter faded instantly. Everyone respected him, even feared him a little. He stood straight, chin lifted, but his expression was unreadable. He walked toward the stage and said, "We will begin the final preparation. Everyone take your positions." The girl took a deep breath and climbed the steps. She could sense the empty seats stretching before her. Tomorrow they would be full. Tomorrow the world would judge her again. The memory of laughter from the previous day still stung her, but she pushed it away. Today was a new chance. She sat at the bench. Her hands hovered above the keys, waiting for his signal. The famous pianist stood beside her, arms crossed. "Remember," he said, "this piece requires precision." "I understand," she replied calmly. "And control." "Yes, and emotion, but the right kind." The girl paused. "There is no wrong kind of emotion," she said quietly. He didn't argue, but she sensed his silence wasn't agreement. It was confusion. She pressed the first key. The hall filled with music. Soft at first, then rising. She felt the melody stretch through her fingers, like a story finally ready to be told. Her face relaxed. Her shoulders loosened. She let herself fall into the sound, trusting it to hold her. Halfway through the piece, she heard something unexpected, a faint breath from the pianist, almost like surprise. His stance shifted. His arms slowly lowered. He began walking around her as she played, listening closely. She felt his presence, but it no longer felt harsh. It felt searching. When she finished, the entire hall stayed silent again. Even the other musicians seemed unsure of what they had just witnessed. The pianist took a step closer. "Again," he said softly. She obeyed. This time, he didn't walk away. He stood beside her, listening with renewed focus. At the end of the performance, he exhaled heavily. Not in frustration this time. In realization. "You're not following the sheet," he said quietly. "You're following something else." "I'm following what I hear in my heart," she said. "And you think that is enough?" He asked. She smiled gently. "Isn't that what music is for?" He didn't reply, but she felt something shift in him, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. The break ended, and the rest of the orchestra prepared for the final run-through. The girl placed her hands over the keys again. But this time, the pianist did something no one expected. He walked to the second piano, placed at the far end of the stage. He sat down. The room tensed. He never played during rehearsals with students. Never. Then he began to play. Not with force. Not with cold perfection. But softly, gently. His melody joined hers like two rivers meeting. The sound filled the hall, warm and full. The other musicians stared, astonished. The girl smiled, letting her part blend naturally with his. For the first time, he wasn't leading. He wasn't commanding. He was listening. The duet grew stronger, brighter, richer. Even though she couldn't see his expression, she felt it, his guard breaking, his pride quieting. When the final note faded, the hall stayed silent for a long time. Then someone whispered, "This is history." The girl felt her heartbeat steady. She didn't know what tomorrow's performance would bring. She didn't know if the crowd would accept her. But today, on this stage, something important had changed. She had touched the heart of a man who believed nothing could surprise him. And tomorrow, she hoped the world would listen the same way he finally had. The day of the performance arrived with a calm that felt unreal, like the world had softened its edges just for her. The girl stood behind the heavy curtain, feeling its thick fabric under her fingers, while she listened to the hum of the audience gathering. Their voices rose and blended into one giant cloud of sound. She couldn't see them, but she could sense their presence, hundreds of people settling into their seats. Unaware of how much this moment meant to her, her heart beat slowly, not from fear, but from something deeper. All the practice, all the doubt, all the pain from the day she had been mocked, everything had led to this. She breathed in slowly, letting the familiar scent of polished wood and stage dust ground her. The famous pianist stood a few steps away. He hadn't spoken much that morning, but his silence felt different. Not cold, not distant. It felt thoughtful, almost protective. She could sense him watching her now, not with the sharp judgment he once carried, but with a quiet respect. "You'll do well," he said softly. His voice didn't shake, but it wasn't hard either. It carried honesty, something she wasn't used to hearing from him. "I'll try," she whispered. "You don't need to try," he replied. "Just play." Those words warmed her more than he probably intended. She nodded gently. A stage assistant approached. "5 minutes," she said in a hushed voice. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until she stepped into a world she couldn't see, but one that would be watching her closely. The girl lifted her hand to her chest, feeling the rise and fall of her own breath. She remembered the laughter from the earlier performance, the doubt, the way people had looked at her as if she didn't belong. But she also remembered the duet from yesterday, how the pianist had joined her, how their melodies met like two people finally hearing one another. She remembered how, for the first time, she felt seen not through eyes, but through sound. A gentle tap on her shoulder signaled her cue. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stepped forward. Her cane wasn't with her this time. She knew her path. The floor beneath her feet was familiar. The stage had become a friend. When she reached the bench, she sat down slowly. The hall erupted into applause, though she hadn't played a single note yet. She wasn't sure if the applause was for her or for the event itself, but the warmth of it filled her chest. She placed her hands on the keys. The surface felt cool and smooth, like calm water waiting for ripples. The applause quieted. For a moment, the entire world felt silent. Then she began. Her first note floated into the hall like a quiet breath. Soft, delicate, but sure. Her fingers glided across the keys. shaping the melody she had carried inside her for so long. Every rise in sound was a memory. Every fall was a piece of her heart. She wasn't just playing a piece of music. She was speaking. She was telling every person in that hall what it felt like to be doubted, to be dismissed, to be unseen. But she was also telling them what it felt like to rise, to hope, to feel the world open again. Midway through her performance, she felt a shift in the room. The air grew still. People weren't just listening, they were feeling. She sensed the stillness like a warm wave washing over her yacht. And then something unexpected happened. The famous pianist stepped onto the stage. His footsteps were soft, but she recognized them. The audience murmured in surprise. She didn't stop playing. Her melody continued, steady and full. He walked to the second piano. He sat down Dot, and he joined her. Got their notes met in the air once more, intertwining like two voices telling the same story from different angles. His part was gentle, not overpowering hers. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control the music. He was letting it lead him. Together, they filled the hall with a sound that made silence impossible. A sound that rose high above doubt, pride, or fear. A sound that felt like truth. She smiled softly as she played, sensing the way his music bent toward hers, how he adjusted to match her emotion. It felt like a conversation, one that no words could ever hold. The final note approached. She slowed her hands, letting the melody settle. He followed her lead, letting the sound fall into a peaceful hush. When the music ended, the silence was sharp and powerful, Dot, and then the hall exploded. Applause thundered through the air, rolling forward like a giant wave. People rose from their seats, cheering, clapping, shouting. She couldn't see their faces, but she could feel their awe, their joy, their gratitude. The girl bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. Her heart felt full, almost too full. She had dreamed of moments like this, but she had never imagined them this deeply. The pianist stood from his bench. For a moment, he didn't face the audience. He turned to her. She sensed his presence beside her and felt the warmth of his hand gently touch her shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. She didn't know what to say. Her breath caught in her throat. "For what?" she asked softly. "For reminding me what music is," he replied. The audience continued cheering, but at that moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them and the piano between them. He guided her gently toward this front of the stage. She took a step, then another, letting the sound of applause lead her. They bowed together, Dot, when they rose. She felt something warm slip into her hand, the pianist's hand, not guiding, not leading, Dot just holding. A gesture of respect that the applause lasted long enough to feel like a sunrise. Backstage, after the performance ended, people rushed to her. Musicians hugged her. Staff members congratulated her. Some audience members who came backstage handed her small notes, gifts, or words she would later ask someone to read to her. One woman said, "Your music made me remember my childhood." A man said, "I've never heard emotion like that. You touched my heart." And the young violinist whispered, "You changed all of us." The girl felt tears gather, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Later, when the stage finally emptied and the hall became quiet again, she sat alone at the piano. She ran her fingers across the keys. Slowly, gently, Dot, the pianist, approached one last time. His voice was calm. "The world knows your name now," he said softly. She smiled. "I didn't do it for that. I know." She tilted her head slightly. "Why did you join me today?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Because your music showed me something I forgot," he said. "It showed me that talent isn't only about skill. It's about heart. And you. You remind the world to listen." The girl breathed in deeply. I just wanted them to hear me. Not because I'm blind, not because I'm different, but because I'm human. And they did, he said. They heard everything. For the first time, she felt truly understood. She stood from the bench, letting her hand glide across the smooth surface one last time. She turned toward the exit, ready to step into a new chapter of her life. As she walked, she heard the pianist call out gently, "You quieted the world today." She paused. A soft smile touched her lips. "No," she whispered. The world finally listened.